Imagine waking up one day to find your entire city erased, not by bombs or floods, but by invisible radiation. A nuclear disaster so secret, it was wiped off the map and forgotten by the world. This is the story of how an entire city vanished, buried under layers of secrecy, science, and silence. In the depths of the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a dangerous race to master nuclear power, for energy, weapons, and prestige. Deep within the Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union, the government built a secret city, Chelyabinsk 40, later renamed Ozersk. It was part of the Mayak Production Association, a major plutonium production facility, established in total secrecy in the 1940s. Chelyabinsk 40 didn't exist on maps. It had no official name and was closed off from the world, surrounded by fences, guards, and silence. Despite being hidden, it was a real city with thousands of residents, many of whom worked directly in nuclear operations. The locals were told they were contributing to national glory, but they weren't told the cost. Mayak's nuclear waste was routinely dumped into nearby rivers and lakes, turning them into toxic death zones. In 1957, the site was storing highly radioactive waste in large underground tanks with cooling systems that were poorly maintained. Engineers noticed rising temperatures in one of the tanks, but due to secrecy and underreporting, no action was taken in time. What followed would become one of the worst nuclear disasters in history, and one of the least known. On September 29, 1957, a chemical explosion rocked the Mayak site when a tank containing 70 to 80 tons of radioactive waste overheated. It wasn't a nuclear bomb-style blast, but it was devastating. The explosion released 20 million curies of radioactive isotopes into the air. A radioactive cloud spread silently across the Soviet countryside, contaminating 20,000 square kilometers. The nearest publicly known town was Kyshtym, so the disaster became known internationally as the Kyshtym disaster. Residents in the path of the fallout saw animals dying, plants wilting, and strange burns on their skin, with no warning from officials. Symptoms of acute radiation sickness appeared, including vomiting, hair loss, and sudden deaths. Government response was swift but secretive. They evacuated more than 10,000 people but provided no explanation. Villages were bulldozed. Residents were silenced. Entire communities were told to vanish overnight. Many were told it was a chemical leak or gas explosion, never the truth, that they had been exposed to massive radiation. The Soviet state buried the incident, along with the city's fate. Chelyabinsk 40, though still inhabited by workers, remained completely hidden from the world. Maps of the Soviet Union simply didn't show it. Even its name was a state secret. Nearby towns and villages most heavily affected by the fallout were entirely removed from maps and Soviet records. These communities were erased, their ruins sealed off, and their names never spoken of again. Survivors were relocated but monitored, prevented from speaking out, under fear of imprisonment. Medical records were falsified or hidden. Deaths were attributed to unrelated causes. Even scientists in the USSR were not told the full scope of what happened. Secrecy was absolute. Internationally, the event was barely known until decades later, when Soviet dissidents and whistleblowers spoke out. The first major revelation came from Boris Medvedev in the 1970s, who risked everything to expose the truth. But by then, the damage was done. A city had been effectively wiped from human memory. After the Soviet Union collapsed, declassified documents and survivor testimonies finally brought the Kyshtym disaster into the light. Radiation readings showed exposure levels in some areas were as high as those seen in Chernobyl decades later. Scientists began to piece together the events using satellite imagery, soil samples, and health records. A zone known as the East Ural Radioactive Trace (EURT) marked the path of radioactive fallout, stretching hundreds of kilometers. Studies linked high rates of cancer, leukemia, and birth defects to radiation exposure in the region. Environmental damage was catastrophic, rivers remained toxic, and entire ecosystems were altered. Genetic studies of residents and wildlife showed long-term mutations and adaptations to radiation. The disaster prompted a global re-evaluation of nuclear waste storage and reactor safety protocols. Today, Mayak is still in operation but under international scrutiny and stricter safety measures. What happened in Chelyabinsk 40 now serves as a grim warning for all nuclear nations. The affected region remains one of the most contaminated places on Earth. Many of the original evacuated areas are still off-limits, patrolled, and marked as hazardous. The Teka River and Lake Karakay near Mayak are among the most radioactive water bodies known. Residents who returned or refused evacuation suffered long-term illnesses and disabilities. Some survivors still live under medical supervision, with multi-generational health consequences. The psychological trauma of secrecy and betrayal has scarred communities for decades. Despite the scale of the disaster, there are no official memorials from the Russian government. Independent organizations and international researchers continue to study the region. Nature has adapted in strange ways. Animals live in radioactive zones, but with observed mutations. The legacy of Kyshtym is still unfolding, and its lessons remain painfully relevant. The affected region remains one of the most contaminated places on Earth. It highlighted the critical need for transparency, scientific accountability, and ethical oversight. Modern nuclear facilities now have international inspections and must report incidents openly. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, cites Kyshtym as one of the key historical failures. Advances in waste management and reactor design are direct responses to disasters like this one. Survivors have advocated for justice, recognition, and compensation, though many remain unheard. The disaster is now taught in nuclear engineering and policy courses worldwide. Still, few members of the general public know the full story. Sharing it is essential, not just to honor victims, but to ensure we never repeat these mistakes. Because forgetting history doesn't erase it. It only ensures we live through it again. Thanks for watching. If this story shook you, share it with someone who needs to know the truth behind forgotten disasters. Comment below your thoughts. What other hidden scientific stories should we explore next? Don't forget to subscribe and stay curious.